Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Kaftet. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Felber on the second yahrzeit of Yuval Mor Yosef and Yossi Cohen, who were killed in a terror attack at Kivat Asaf, and for the continued refuah shlema of her son Netanel Ilam Ben Shenet Tzipora, who was also severely injured at that event. And by Sylvia Simmons to mark the 8th yahrzeit of her mother, Pessi Simmons, Zichrona Lebracha, whose lifelong dedication to Jewish values and learning inspired many during her long life with a reflective, inquiring mind, and who would be enthused by the opportunities offered by Adran to the next generation of Jewish women. We're going to start now with a review, a brief review of what happened since the bottom of Kaf Chet Amud Aleph, because we need to have that down pat before we move on. So the Mishnah on Kaf Chet Amud Aleph said at the bottom, Chametz shel nochri she'avar alav Pesach. If you have chametz from a Gentile that was he owned over Pesach, or she owned over Pesach, and now it's Pesach is over. What's its status, right? You would think this was obvious. Mutar b'hana'ah. Of course, you can benefit from it, right? There was no reason not to. Although we're going to see that maybe some people think yes. V'shel Yisrael asur b'hana'ah. But if it belonged to a Jew and the Jew owned it on Pesach, then one is not allowed to benefit from it. Shenehmal lo yara'eh lecha se'or. Remember this, okay? Because this pasuk is going to cause some problems later, because it says chametz owned by a Jew is forbidden b'hana'ah after Pesach, because it says you cannot see se'or, you can't see 11 things on Pesach. Not yet clear what the connection is. It's going to depend on the big question that we asked yesterday, which is, who does this Mishnah go according to? The Gemara then proceeded to bring three opinions. We saw Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Yehuda said, okay, let's just review the opinions. The chametz shavar alav Pesach, I'm going to focus on the part that's important for our purposes. Chametz after Pesach is forbidden by Torah law. Now, the assumption of the Gemara, when it asked the question at the very end, and let's start with that, Mani matnitin, I Rabbi Yehuda, I'm at the very last line of Kaf Chet Amud Bet, chametz stomach amar afilu dinochri. There he seemed to indicate any chametz shavar alav Pesach is going to be forbidden. They didn't distinguish Jew, Gentile, and therefore they assume, since there's a lo taseh to eat chametz not only on Pesach but after Pesach, just like on Pesach you can't eat chametz of a Gentiles, therefore after Pesach you also can't. This would make things quite difficult for us. We sell our chametz to Gentiles, or if you're living outside of Israel, it's much easier to do this. You go to a store that night where they have bread, right? As long as it's owned by a non-Jewish person, or if it was a Jewish person who sold it and bought it back. But theoretically, you could go and buy, any kind of chametz, buy pasta, anything that was owned by a Gentile over Pesach. It's not a problem. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they assume right now that Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's a problem. Any chametz, even if it was owned by a Gentile, Pesach is over. You kind of have to start from scratch. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Now, Rabbi Shimon. So now, what did Rabbi Shimon say? Rabbi Shimon said it's not forbidden to eat chametz after Pesach, even of a Jew, by Torah law. Okay, again, by rabbinic law will be a problem, but by Torah law, it's not a problem. So therefore, if it's not a problem, if there's no lo taseh, there's no negative commandment associated with it, then I'm back in the Gemara at the very top of our daf now. The Yisrael nama mishra kashare. Then after, if it's not forbidden after Pesach, then why should it be forbidden if you owned it on Pesach? It shouldn't make a difference whether you owned it or didn't own it. So it doesn't sound like it matches Rabbi Shimon. And Rabbi Yosef Glili, for sure it can't match his opinion, because remember what he said? He had this radical opinion. The chametz on Pesach, you can benefit from. You can't eat, but you can benefit. If that's the case, afilu toch zmano nami mishra kashare b'hana'ah. Therefore, even on Pesach, you can benefit. So of course, after Pesach, you can benefit. So basically, Mishnah doesn't seem to apply to anybody. So, be to match up to any of these opinions. And the assumption is it must match up to one of them. So we're going to have two different answers. The first one is a very radical answer. You're going to be very shocked. Luckily, we're not close to Pesach, because then I'd worry that maybe you take this seriously and actually go do what he says. But hopefully by the time Pesach comes, you won't remember this. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, La'olam Rabbi Yehuda. This really is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, how does it match Rabbi Yehuda? What was the problem? We said Rabbi Yehuda doesn't seem to distinguish whether it's owned by a Gentile or owned by a Jew. He says across the board, it's a lo taseh, both to eat chametz on Pesach, and also, right, chametz on Pesach is karet also. But after Pesach, it's also a lo taseh lo yachel lecha chametz. Now, on Pesach, we don't distinguish Gentile and Jew. So after Pesach, we shouldn't distinguish Gentile and Jew, right? Would you eat Pesach that's owned by a Gentile on Pesach? Of course not. So, and would you get benefit from it? No. So therefore, also after Pesach, it should be the same. So what does he explain? Here comes the radical opinion. Yalif se'or da achila mi se'or de re'iyah. He says we learn se'or for eating from se'or of seeing. Remember, lo yira'eh lecha se'or, you can't see chametz. Lo yimatzeh lecha, right? You can't find chametz anywhere. Now, what did we say about that? Remember the famous drasha? We saw this a bunch of times already. Ma se'or de re'iyah, how do we say? Shelcha yata ro'eh, aval ata ro'eh shel acherim b'shel gavoah. You can't see chametz that's owned by a Jew, like your own. But what's allowed on Pesach? If you see chametz of a Gentile, Gentiles walking across the street carrying chametz, not forbidden to see that, right? We even said, even if he's in your house, theoretically, there's no Isser D'Oraita anyway, right? Maybe we try not to do this. But if you have a Gentile that comes to your house, brings their ham sandwich, on Pesach, should be fine, okay? So, and not only that, and this is going to be important for the continuation, v'shel gavoah. Also, if it's hekdesh, okay? If it's sanctified to the temple, again, it doesn't belong to you. This drasha comes up all the time in the Torah. When it says yours, it excludes something that belongs to God, theoretically, right? It belongs to the temple. So what does he say? Well, we're going to learn, right, that just like you can't see chametz, and that only applies to chametz of your own and not of a Gentile's and not of hekdesh. Af se'or, here comes the big line, listen up. Af se'or da achila shelcha yata ochel, avalata ochel shel acherim v'shel gavoah. Likewise, the forbidden, the isur of eating chametz on Pesach, okay? Shelcha yata ochel, avalata ochel shel acherim v'shel gavoah. According to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, they think that Rabbi Yehuda actually thinks that you can eat chametz of a Gentile on Pesach according to Torah law. Okay, obviously not the Rabbanan, but according to Torah law, and if you don't believe me, look at Rashi. Yalif se'or da'achila, third line on the in Rashi. Klomar, chametz, digabe lo ye'achel, mi se'or d'riyah, right? In other words, we're going to learn se'or da'achila, which is chametz of lo ye'achel, can't be eaten, from se'or d'riyah. Here comes his line. Umutar chemtzo shel nechli af ba'achila va'afilu bePesach min haTorah. In other words, by Torah law, it's only forbidden not to eat your own chametz. It's not forbidden to, and that would include any chametz that belongs to a Jew. However, if it belongs to a Gentile or if it belongs to the temple, temple, it's a separate problem. You'll have the din me'ila, and we're going to get back to that later. Remember, any misuse of consecrated property, if you were to eat chametz of hekdesh, it would be a problem because you ate hekdesh, although we're going to see maybe it is a problem, maybe it's not a problem. We're going to get to that later. So the point is that he thinks, okay, now, if that's the case, our Mishnah, let's look back at our Mishnah. Right now, according to this, makes sense now that it's Rabbi Yehuda, because he doesn't think it's forbidden on Pesach. Of course, it's going to be permitted after Pesach. Okay, so whereas we thought in the beginning, he didn't distinguish, we're now going to learn he did distinguish, because lo yachel lecha chametz actually, in general, is different for Gentiles chametz and Jews chametz. Okay, now the problem is, if it's really Rabbi Yehuda, what should it have said? It should have set up the extremes. It should have said chametz of a nochri is permitted even to eat and even on Pesach, right? Whereas chametz of a Jew is forbidden even after Pesach and even only to benefit. Okay, that would be the two extremes. But instead, the Mishnah says chametz shel nochri, right? They're basically only talking about after Pesach and only about benefit. So that's why the Gemara has to explain according to him. Ubedinhu di baile lemitne. It really should have said afilu ba'achila namishari. Even to eat, it's allowed. So why, if Rabbi Yehuda thinks you can even eat a chametz of a Gentile, and soon we're going to say, and even on Pesach. So why did it say then hana'ah, only benefit? So they basically say, it's true they wanted to show the extremes, but they wanted to show the extreme of the Jews' chametz. They wanted to focus on the second part. The second part said a Jews' chametz, even after Pesach, is forbidden to benefit from. So therefore, when they talked about the Gentiles, they just compared it. They used the same language, chametz after Pesach and benefit only. And therefore, they talked about chametz of a Gentile that you can benefit. even though theoretically you can even eat. And that right now they're only focusing on the benefit. And right now they're going to focus on the fact that it's on Pesach also allowed and not only after Pesach. So again, they're going to say the same thing. Really, they should have said even on Pesach, you can benefit from it. Again, they just matched it to the second part. As if like the second part's the main part, that the Jews' chametz is forbidden to benefit from after Pesach. So when they talked about the Gentile, they just matched the language. They were talking about after Pesach and talking about benefit, even though theoretically, even on Pesach and even for eating, it would be allowed. Okay, that's obviously a difficulty in the Mishnah, according to this explanation, but that's how they explain it. Just so you know, before you get too hooked on this idea that one could eat chametz of a Gentile on Pesach, we're going to say that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov changed his mind and he didn't any longer think that way. Okay, right? And just to remember, he's also only explaining Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, which we're going to see later. We don't even hold like Rabbi Yehuda, but that's another point. So he's not saying this is allowed. He's saying according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is how he understands Rabbi Yehuda. But again, we're going to say in a few minutes, he obviously changed his mind about this and they're going to prove it. Next, that was the first answer to who does the Mishnah follow. So according to this, the Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's radical explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Amar, La'olam Rabbi Shimon, really the Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Now remember Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said, Chametz shavar alav Pesach is not forbidden by Torah law. So if it's not forbidden by Torah law, why would it be forbidden to benefit from? Right? It's not forbidden to eat. Why would it be forbidden also to benefit from? The Rabbi Shimon, Kanasa Kanis. The rabbis instituted a fine, a penalty. They said, hey, you weren't supposed to leave your chametz all Pesach. You did. Now we're going to penalize you. We're not going to allow you to benefit from it because if we do, you'll be encouraged to not get rid of all your chametz. Right? Imagine you want to have your Cheerios the morning after Pesach. So you're going to leave your cereal in your house just so that the next morning you can wake up and your cereal's there and you don't have to run to the store that night, right? Imagine in the days when you couldn't sell your chametz and some people even don't sell things like that. So it's just easier. So therefore we said, look, I know you're going to want to do that. So therefore we're going to penalize you and say anything that you owned over Pesach. Again, this is if you didn't sell it, okay, you owned it really. So if you owned it and you kept it, then we're not going to allow you to eat it after Pesach, okay? And not only not eat, also not benefit, because then you'll really make sure to get rid of it. Okay, so now they want to go back to the language of the Mishnah. What I pointed out earlier, I'll review again. The second line says, right, the first line says, Gentiles, chametz is permitted to benefit from after Pesach. The second line was, Shel Yisrael asur b'hana'ah, the Jews is forbidden to benefit from, shene'emar lo yira'eh lecha se'or. So what's the connection of that pasuk to the halacha? So they say, for Rava, it works perfectly well. Bishlama leRava. Hainu dekatani shel Yisrael asur mishum shenemar lo yira'eh. It's exactly what he said. Since it says lo yira'eh, you can't see chametz all of Pesach. Therefore, we're going to penalize you if you didn't keep that law. And any chametz you had in your possession over Pesach, we're going to forbid you to eat after Pesach. That was exactly Rava. Okay? It makes perfect sense. Ela Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who says that he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana. And that, right, the Tana is Rabbi Yehuda. And if the Tana is Rabbi Yehuda, what does he hold? Do you remember we saw yesterday? 3 times it says, Lo yachel chametz, kol chametz lo tochelu, right? It says, don't eat chametz 3 times. And therefore, we're going to assume, right, that's why it's forbidden after Pesach, because remember, each one corresponded, one before Pesach, one on Pesach, and one after Pesach. If that's the case, mishum lo yachel chametz mebayle, it should have said not lo yira'eh lecha se'or. It should have said, because it says lo yachel chametz. So how do we explain the Mishnah according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov? So the Gemara says, oh, we have a good explanation. Mi savart aseifa kai, areisha kai. Don't read that as splitting the two, meaning the first part is chametz shel nochri, shavar alav Pesach mutar ba'ana'ah, end of section. Chametz shel Yehudi is asur after Pesach. And then we're going to say, because it says lo yira'eh lecha se'or. No, we're going to say the pasuk lo yira'eh lecha se'or corresponds to the first part, which makes perfect sense now according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, because what did he say? The first part says the Gentiles is permitted. Why is it permitted? Because lo yira'eh lecha se'or, right? You, your own, not a Gentiles. And therefore, we're going to say So, right, therefore, it makes perfect sense as long as you say that that pasuk is referring to the first part of the Mishnah, the Hachi Kamar, and this is how it should read. Meaning, and then you'd have to say an added thing, which is, even though that's only by Bal Yereh and Bal Yematzeh, you can't see, you can't find chametz, and that doesn't apply to a Gentiles. And we're going to learn seor of eating from seor of finding. Okay, and therefore that's gonna make it work out. Now I just wanted to look for a second, Gita. I saw you asked a question about. Yes, it's interesting what you're pointing out, which is that Rava is saying that the law in the Mishnah is a rabbinic law, right? And Rav Acha is really saying it's not exactly a Torah law. It's still, and as it's based on, right? I guess you're right. Yeah. If I understand your question, you're basically saying that according to Rava, this is just rabbinic in nature, that you can't benefit from Chametz Shavar Lava Pesach, 100%. That's rabbinic according to Rava. And according to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, it's Torah law, because the Torah says it's a sur, right? It's a sur even lachar zmano, it's a lo taseh. And then we go back to our classic. Whenever it says lo yachel, right, we're going to say that includes benefit. So yes, Torah law according to Rav Acha, rabbinic law according to Rav. Now we're going to say, before we move on about saying that Rav Acha changed his mind, we're going to say azdu l'ta'amayu. They both go according to their own opinions, meaning they are consistent within other things we saw they said. Di'itmar, as it was said, there's a machloket between the two of them, Rava and Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, about the following. They also disagree elsewhere about what punishment you get if you eat seor of a nochri, okay, the leavening agent of a nochri, that was left, right, that the nochri owned, the Gentile owned on Pesach. What does Rabbi Yehuda think? Rava Amar Lokeh, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Omer Eino Lokeh. So now, again, Rava Amar Lokeh, why does he say you get lashes for this? Lo Yalef Rabbi Yehuda Seor D'Achila Mi Seor D'Riyah. Remember we said in the beginning, the first way we understood Rabbi Yehuda before we got to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov was to say he doesn't distinguish whether it was owned by a Gentile or whether it was owned by a Jew. It says Lo Yachel, you can't eat any chametz that was on right after Pesach either. And he didn't distinguish Gentile or Jew. Therefore, if you were to eat chametz that was a Gentile after Pesach, you would actually get lashes. It would be a lo taseh. Again, only according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't hold this way, but yes, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's what he would think. And Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who says that even on Pesach, it's allowed. Of course, after Pesach, you wouldn't get lashes for it. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, why? Because he's going to learn it from seeing, right? And on seeing, it's not a problem. Therefore, also, it's not going to be a problem after Pesach. Okay. Now we're going to get to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov clearly changed his mind. Hadabe Rav Acha Bar Yaakov me'ahi. Okay, what we're going to prove from here, and it's going to take a little while, so patience. We're going to prove from here that Rabbi Yehuda clearly thinks the chametz of. Now, remember the two exceptions. It was chametz of a nochri and also chametz of hekdesh. So if we can prove, our topic is going to be chametz of hekdesh, sanctified. If we can prove the chametz of hekdesh is going to be forbidden on Pesach, okay, and part of the whole isur, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then we're going to disprove. Right, we're going to say he obviously changed his mind from what he said here, because a Gentile and hekdesh should be the one and the same. And we'll see his explanation. What we're going to have is a braita. The structure is we're going to have a braita. It's helpful if you use the sheet. We have a braita. We're going to have 5 different opinions about how to understand the machloket in this braita. Okay, so 5 different explanations. The 4th one is going to be our person, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. And from his answer, it's going to be clear that he changed his mind. So here goes. Ditanya. If you eat chametz that belongs to the temple and you eat it on Pesach, Moed is the holiday, it means obviously the holiday of Pesach. So are you obligated in Me'ilah? What is Me'ilah? Again, Me'ilah means you misused consecrated property by accident. You're obligated to, number 1, bring a korban, Asham Me'ilot, and that's a guilt offering called an Asham Me'ilot. You're also obligated to pay the value of the loss, the financial loss you caused to the temple, plus an additional 5th, which is really a quarter because they count the 5th from the whole amount once you add the 5th, and then it's a 5th of that, which really ends up a quarter. So now, the issue is you're not going to be obligated the korban if you actually didn't cause any sort of financial loss to the temple. So what if you eat chametz of hekdesh on Pesach? Are you causing a loss to the temple? Does it have any financial value at all? Again, this is going to sort of depend on whether you can sell this down the road or sell this now. Is it forbidden for benefit now? Is it permitted to benefit from hekdesh? Okay, it's going to sort of depend on whether it has any financial value. So ditanya. So now we're going to say, man yesh omrim. Who's the yesh omrim? Really, the question is not just who's the yesh omrim, but what's the debate between the two of them? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. First answer. Rabbi Nechunya ben Akanahu. He. Okay, it's the second opinion. Lo ma'al must be Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. Why? Ditanya Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana haya oseh et Yom Kippurim keshabat letashlumin. Okay, we're going to read this and then I'll give some background and explain. Ma Shabbat mitchayev benafsho upatur min hatashlumin. Af Yom Kippurim mitchayev benafsho upatur min hatashlumin. Now, there's something in halacha called kim le b'derabba mineh. This means that it's funny. There's a lot of sugyot here that come up in Sanhedrin. It's very interesting. The beginning of Pesachim, right? We had the sugya about the times of the errors people make in time. That we brought in the sugya from Sanhedrin. The ereg v'al yavor is from Sanhedrin, and this is a famous sugya in Sanhedrin. It's called kim le b'derabba mineh. That means if you're obligated in one action, so let's say Shabbat, you did something on Shabbat that obligated you both. It was usher from the Torah. It was one of the malachot. And you're obligated to get stoned by the Beit Din. And at the same time, you cause a financial loss to someone. Let's say you're kotzel, you reap someone, you harvested someone else's crops. So at the same time, you're chayav in stealing and you have to return the value of what you stole. And you're obligated in Shabbat. So the Beit Din only administers the more severe. We don't punish two things. We say, kim le b'derabba mineh, you're only obligated in the death penalty, and you don't have to pay. We're going to learn this a lot more in depth when we get to it later in Sanhedrin, but in any case, that's the concept. So now, that makes sense if the Beit Din is administering the punishment, so they can only administer one punishment. But what if you did something that's chayav karet, like Yom Kippur, for example, okay? Or for our purposes, I said Yom Kippur because that's the example they bring here with Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, but it's going to apply to chametz on Pesach. If you eat chametz on Pesach, you're chayav karet. Now, karet is a punishment by God. It means the Beit Din doesn't administer that punishment. However, in the end, you're still going to be obligated both. Now, in this case, here you have me'ila, you're chayav to pay money to replace the object, and you're also obligated the death penalty. But your death penalty is only a death penalty by God, not by the Beit Din. So there's a debate about whether kim le b'derabba mineh applies when the Beit Din is not administering the punishment. Here, the Beit Din would only administer one punishment to make you pay. On the other hand, you have on your head two punishments because you have God's punishment of karet and paying from the court. So the question is, does kimle apply there or not? And that's the machloket. Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana thinks, and this is what I read before, I'll read it again. He would make Yom Kippurim like Shabbat for tashlumin, meaning if you have to pay money, okay? So Yom Kippur, which is only karet, not the Beit Din, if you violate Yom Kippur, you don't get skila, you don't get stoned. The Beit Din doesn't kill you at all, but you get a punishment from God. So, ma Shabbat mitchayev benafsho patur min hatashlumin, since on Shabbat you'd be obligated to be killed, but you'd be exempt from paying. Af Yom Kippurim mitchayev benafsho patur min hatashlumin. Yom Kippurim will be the same. So that's the debate. Okay, now let's take it to our case. So if you're exempt from payment, then there's no me'ila. That's Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. If you're not exempt from payment, because that's the people who disagree with him, then there would be a law of me'ila, because even though it was karet, since it was karet and it's not the court, you still have to pay, and therefore it'll be ma'at. Second explanation, Rav Yosef Amar, bipodin et hakodashim la'achilan leklavim kamiflage. We learned already that you can redeem sanctified items, that you can redeem them. Again, there's different sanctity. We'll just assume you sanctified something for the value of its money. So you can redeem it, just like the Maser Sheni you bring to the temple and then you redeem it. Also sanctified items, as long as they're not Kedushat HaGuf, like an animal that was designated for a sacrifice would be different. But if, let's say it was, we saw the other day, wood that you designate for a sacrifice, so you can redeem. What if it's food that you sanctified? And you sanctified the value of food. Now you can redeem it, but there's a debate about whether you can redeem it if you can't eat that food. And the only thing you can do with that food is give it to the dogs. So if you can give it to the dogs, are you allowed to redeem it? And the reason why there's a debate is because some people say we learned it out from a verse. The verse where it talks about redeeming talks about you can redeem it and then you eat it. So they say, well, only for eating are you allowed to redeem, but you can't redeem something to then give it to the dogs. That's not allowed, because you can't take something that's sanctified and redeem it to put it, in some insignificant. Only if you want to eat it already, that's important enough, will allow you to do it. So there's a debate whether you can or not. So he says, Manda Amar Ma'al. So the one who says that there is a law of Me'ilah, because he says, Podin et HaKodashim lachilan leklavim. Therefore, you can take this chametz that was hekdesh. Now remember, chametz of hekdesh is not forbidden like chametz of a Jew. So therefore, you can redeem it and you can give it to a dog because it's not forbidden to benefit from. Or my chametz, it would be forbidden to benefit from. But this chametz can be given to a dog. So if I can redeem it and give it to a dog, that means there's value to this chametz. There's value, then I have to return the value. Okay? Now, Manda Amar Lomal, this is, by the way, regardless, right? They're not talking about kimle. You'd have to assume here that nobody thinks we're going to hold kimle, and therefore it's just a question, does it have value or does it not? Manda Amar Lomal, Kasavar Ein Podin. You can't redeem this because you have nothing to do with it right now. You can't eat it yourself. So since you can't eat it, it has no value. And therefore, we're going to say there's no me'ilah because it has no value, because the only way to redeem something is for you to eat it. It's Pesach now. You can't eat this. So it had no value at the time. Rav Acha bar Rava, Tamela laha shmata mishmei de Rav Yosef b'ha lishna. That basically means, it's a long way to say, what we saw, first we saw Rabbi Yochanan, then we saw Rav Yosef. Now, Rav Acha bar Rava, don't confuse him with Rav Acha bar Yaakov. It's not our person yet. It's a different Rav Acha. He understands Rav Yosef. He had a different version of what Rav Yosef himself said. So this is like 2a. Okay, we have one, which was Rabbi Yochanan. We had two, which was Rav Yosef. This is 2a. This is Rav Yosef's second version. Okay, so what does he say? Nobody thinks that you're allowed to redeem items to give it to a dog. So therefore, it doesn't have value right now. However, what's Chametz Shavar Alav Pesach? Chametz Shavar Alav Pesach is a problem for a Jew who wasn't allowed to keep chametz over Pesach. His chametz is forbidden after Pesach. But what about this food, this chametz of hekdesh? Since there's no isur bal yera bal yamatzeh by hekdesh, so therefore after Pesach it's not going to be forbidden b'hana'ah, just like a nochri is not forbidden b'hana'ah. Right, their chametz we can buy after Pesach. Also, the hekdesh can be redeemed after Pesach. So if you ate it on Pesach, it's true it didn't have value at that moment, but down the road it would have value. Now that's what we call davar hagorem lemamon. It eventually will have monetary value. So the question is, how do we view that? And that's the machloka between them. Hacha b'haka miflage. This is their machloka. B'davar hagorem lemamon kimamon dame. Do we see this? Since right now it has no value because you have nothing to do with this on Pesach. But if you wait a few more days, you'll be able to get rid of it, right? You'll be able to redeem it. So therefore, does it have value? And so it does have value because it's considered right now mamon because it eventually will have financial value. Almost sounds like a stock that's worth nothing now, but will be worth something later, right? Maybe. But that you never really know. This after Pesach it will be worth value had you not eaten it. Manda amar ma'al kasavar davar golem lemamon. Sorry, I read it the wrong, right? So sorry, I think I just read that line twice. Let's just read it again. If you say ma'al, it's because you hold there is financial value to it because davar golem lemamon kim mamon dami. Umanda amar lo ma'al, and the one who says there is no me'ilah here holds kasavar davar golem lemamon lav kim mamon dami, right? Something that will eventually have value, but it doesn't right now. That's not considered financial value. So you didn't cause any loss to the temple because at that moment it wasn't worth anything, and therefore it's like mamon. Now, Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar. Okay, finally we get to Rav Acha bar Yaakov. This is our fourth answer, right? We have 1 and 2, 2a and 2b, but basically 3 altogether. Now Rav Acha bar Yaakov comes and says, "Dekule alma davar golem lemamon kim mamon dami." Really, it does have financial value. But what's the debate? And here comes the big line. It's all based on what Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say. Now it depends. You're going to see here what he thinks Rabbi Yehuda holds. According to what we saw before, what will Rabbi Yehuda hold? Chametz, that's hekdesh, you can even benefit from on Pesach. You can even eat on Pesach, theoretically. You can't eat because it's hekdesh, but theoretically it could be eaten. But here he doesn't say that. He says, Manda Amar Lo Ma'al. Lo Ma'al means it has no value. Who's that? Ki Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds this has no value. Why does it have no value? Because he thinks chametz hekdesh shavar lava pesach. Remember, he said chametz shavar lava pesach is a lo taseh. And how did Rabbi explain it? Rabbi explained whether it was a Gentiles, whether it was a Jews, which would mean also whether it was hekdesh. It's a lo taseh in the Torah. It's a negative commandment. Basically, you can't eat any chametz shavar alav Pesach according to Rabbi Yehuda. That obviously disagrees with what Rav Acha bar Yaakov said earlier, which was you can even eat it on Pesach, right? It was the reverse. So here it's ki Rabbi Yehuda, meaning that there's no value at all because there's nothing you could do with it. So therefore, he clearly changed his mind. Umanda amar ma'al, and the one who says there is value to it is ki Rabbi Shimon, because again, everyone holds davar hagorem lemamon is kimamon. And what did Rabbi Shimon say? Chametz shavar alav Pesach isn't forbidden after Pesach, right? By Torah law. So therefore, it has value. So therefore, you're ma'al, because eventually you'll be able to sell it, even if now it doesn't have any value. You know, you can redeem it. Okay. Veha, so here comes our question, even though I already explained it. The Gemara now says, Vaha Rav Acha bar Yaakov Huda Amar de Rabbi Yehuda Yalef Seor Dachila Miseor De'Riyah. Right? He's the one who said that we learn Lo Yira Elecha, right? Seor of Achila, eating it is just like seeing it, which is only chametz that's your own and not owned by the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore Ela Hadrabe Rav Acha bar Yaakov Me'ahi. He must have changed his mind. Before we move on, we still have one more explanation because I told you there's 5 explanations of this Braita. So we're now on the last one. Rav Ashi Amar, Dekule Alma Ein Podin. Everyone agrees you can't redeem any kodshim. Okay? Vit. In other words, you can't be redeemed kodshim unless they can be eaten, but not if they can be given only to a dog. Vid davar hagorem lemamon lav kemamon tami. And the fact that you can maybe sell it later, it has no value. In other words, you can't eat it now because it's chametz. Later, it doesn't matter what happens later because Tavar Goem Lemamon, if later it'll have value, but doesn't have now, that's not Mamon. The Hacha, but what's the Machloket? But Plukted Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'Rabbanan Kamiflage. Rabbanan here means those who disagree with Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which is Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda that we saw previously. Now, what did Rabbi Yossi Aglili say? Remember, he said Chametz on Pesach is permitted to benefit from. So now what do we learn? Oh, you could sell it theoretically. We could have redeemed it on Pesach because not even lahachil leklavim for any sort of benefit. So since you could have redeemed it on Pesach, therefore it had value on Pesach. The future it wouldn't have helped you, but right then it has value according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So manda amar ma'al, that there is me'ila savar ke Rabbi Yossi. Manda amar lo ma'al ke Rabbanan. And the ones who say lo ma'al must be Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who think it doesn't have value now. Maybe according to some it'll have value later, but that doesn't help you because Davar Goim Lemamon is not Mamon. So we saw 5 different explanations of this. Again, the main reason we brought this was to show Rav Acha bar Yaakov clearly changed his mind. Okay, now that we were talking about the difference between Pesach, before Pesach, and Chametz on Pesach, and after Pesach, we're now going to talk about what is the law of ta'arovot. Okay, ta'arovot is when Chametz falls into something else, right? Like our classic milk into chulent. And, what happens, basar b'chalav, all that kind of stuff. So a little bit of background. If you have the halachot in general of bitul, okay, come into different categories. There's yavesh b'yavesh, dry and dry, which basically means if I have 3 pieces of meat next to each other, they're not touching each other, the flavors didn't get into one or the other, and I have, let's say, 2 are kosher, 1 is not kosher. So generally we'll say we go by rov, and you can assume they're all kosher. Okay, if you take 1, you can assume it's kosher, because you can assume it's from the majority. What if it's lach belach, like liquids with liquids, where they mix in together, or liquids with solid, like let's say you cook the 2 pieces of meat together and the juice from one got into the other, and then already it's a different story, because then they're really combined. Then there's a machloket about whether there's a difference between mim bimino, if something falls into the same type thing, like wine with wine. Okay, let's say you have kosher wine and non-kosher wine that mixed up together. Or wine with water, let's say, okay, where the water's not a different thing, right? And then the taste of the wine is much more noticeable right? We're going to say, mim bimino, we're actually going to be much more stringent because you're not going to be able, the whole idea is, can you tell the taste of the forbidden item in what you're drinking, okay, or eating? So if it's the same taste, then you're not going to be able to tell whether it gave flavor or not, and we're going to be more stringent. If it's one thing in a different item, you'll be able to tell the taste much more easily. Okay, so that's one thing to know, that there's a distinction by some between what we call mim b'mino. If it falls into one, that's the same type of it, we're going to be more stringent. The mim b'she'eno mino, where we're going to assume if milk falls into chulent, you won't really, think about it. meat falls into meat, it'll just give more meat flavor. But if milk falls into cholent, the cholent will kind of overpower it and you won't even taste the milk. That's the idea here, that if it's the same, it'll just strengthen the flavor. If it's different, one flavor will kind of knock out the other. That's the idea. Now, generally we're going to say, so if it's two different things, it's going to be a problem if it gives flavor. So the rabbis estimated, and this is where we get to batal b'shishim, that once there's 60 times of allowed permitted food to one of non-permitted food of Isser, then we're going to assume already it's not going to give flavor, okay? The real idea is you should figure out, okay, and the whole question is, how do you taste it? And it's a good classic question. How do you taste if it gives flavor if it's forbidden? So there's the Gemara talks about, you give it to a kfela aramai, give it to a chef who's a non-Jewish chef, and maybe ask them, is that okay? Can you trust them? Anyway, whole thing there. But basically the rabbi said, we're going to assume it's 1 in 60. Now we all know, or maybe not, and I'll tell you, the chametz, why are we so crazy about chametz b'Pesach? Because chametz is asur b'mashu. It's not, there's no laws of nullification. It doesn't get canceled into anything. We don't hold that way. We're going to see today a machloket about it. It's not so clear that everyone holds that way. See where it comes from. So Amarav. So first we're going to have 3 opinions here. Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan. I charted them each in separate charts on the sheet. I didn't put one chart with all of them because I know it seemed to me easier to do it this way. But if you want, you can organize your own chart of doing it all together. But in any case, let's see the 3 opinions. Chametz bizmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino asur. When it's on Pesach, whether it's the same, whether chametz falls into the same type or chametz falls into a different type, it's going to be forbidden. We don't yet know forbidden in what amount. Okay, we're going to get to that. Shelo bizmano, if it's after Pesach, b'mino asur, shelo b'mino mutar. If it falls into the same type thing, it'll be forbidden. I told you already, mino is more severe. Shelo b'mino, if it falls into something else, it can be canceled. So it can be allowed, permitted. So now they say, b'maya skinam. What case are we talking about? If it had enough to give flavor, then shelo b'zmano, shelo b'mino mutar. Then how could we say if chametz shavar alav Pesach is forbidden after Pesach also? Then how could we say even if it gives flavor, it's going to be allowed? Hayav tama, it gave flavor. Of course, it's forbidden. So ela b'mashu. So therefore, they say it must be. What Rav is talking about is any small amount, any amount of chametz. So now let's go through one by one all the cases. Chametz bizmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino asur. Why is that? So first we have to figure out why it's going to be forbidden b'mashu on Pesach, no matter what, either which way. So first they say Rav l'tameh. Rav goes according to his own opinion. He's consistent with his opinion. It's the way to say it. De Rav Shmuel, de Amr Charvayu, they both say kol isurin shebatorah, anything that's forbidden by Torah law, like chametz b'Pesach, b'mino b'mashu, shelo b'mino b'noten tam. We're going to be more strict on mino. If it falls into something of the same type, any amount, anything that's forbidden by the Torah, forget about chametz b'Pesach because it's karet. Anything that's forbidden by Torah law is basically going to be forbidden, even a little bit, if it falls into the same thing. By the way, this whole thing is learned out. We'll see it more in depth in another sugya. From the blood of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, if you remember, he takes the par and the seir, the bull and the goat, the lamb. I can't remember. It's a goat. And what does he do? He mixes the blood, and it says, and he mixes both those bloods together. Now, how much is going to be more? Obviously, the par has a lot more blood. It's a much bigger animal. So when he mixes the blood, you would think that they would be canceled out. But it says in the Torah, he takes the dam hapal and the dam hasir after they're already mixed in. So they learn from there, oh, look, it's still called blood, even though it's mixed in and it's canceled, really nullified, berov, into the other mixture. So that opinion basically tries to prove from there, right? There's a machloket about it. But look, it's still called dam hasir. You see, it's not batel if it's in the same type. Okay, so he holds that. Now, that's only b'mino. Shelo b'mino, normally, mashahu would be fine. It just needs no tam. Only if it's 1 in 60, it'll be a problem. So what's the reason then that he says min b'she'eno mino and chametz is also forbidden? Rav gazar chametz bizmano shelo b'mino atu chametz bizmano shelo b'mino atu mino. What did Rav say? Chametz b'Pesach is karet. Because it's karet and it's so severe, we're going to be machmir and say even shelo b'mino, it's going to be forbidden b'mashu. And this is why we do what we do. Because in case people get confused and think b'mino also, it'll be b'noten tam, and we don't want people to think that. Since chametz is so strict, we're going to be gozer in that case. And that explains the second part then. Because chametz after Pesach is not as severe. It's not karet. So that's why Shelo Bizmano, Bimino Asur, Ki Rabbi Yehuda. He must hold like Rabbi Yehuda that what? That chametz after Pesach is asur below taseh, right? It's a low taseh. Because it's a low taseh, therefore, it's kol isurin shebatorah, that b'mashu is forbidden. And shelo b'mino, it's going to be mutar. And since it's not karet, it's only a low taseh, we're not going to make a gzerah. That's what we're going to read right now. Shelo b'zmano v'shelo b'mino, right? If it's already after Pesach and it's two different types, chametz falling into something very different from it, then atumino kulehai lo gazrina, right? We don't say shelo b'mino atumino. We don't say we make a gzera for that, right? We don't need to make a gzera when it's not correct. Shmuel. So now we go to Shmuel. Shmuel Amar, chametz bismano b'mino asur, shelo b'mino mutar. Chametz when it's on Pesach, if it falls into the same type, it's going to be forbidden. Like Rav, because what did we say? Rav and Shmuel both hold that any isur is asur b'mashu if it goes into the same type. Shelo b'mino mutar, and we're basically going to say why? Because he doesn't hold that gzera that Rav held. Okay, very simple. Shelo b'zmano ben b'mino ben shelo b'mino mutar. That we'll have to explain because that's not like Rav. So again, let's read it all case by case. Chametz b'zmano b'mino asur, as we said, Shmuel l'tameh. He goes consistent with his opinion. De Rav Shmuel damer travayu kol isurin shebatorah b'mino asurin b'mashu. All Torah prohibitions, which is like chametz b'pesach, is oser b'mashu. Shelo b'mino b'noten tam. But if it falls into something different, a different substance, then we're going to say only if it gives taste. Shelo b'minan atuminan lo gazer, and he doesn't make the same zera that Rav does. Shelo b'zmano. What about after Pesach? Why is he very lenient? And even b'mino, which normally he would say it's forbidden, we'll notice what he said. Only if it's usher by Torah law. So obviously, what's he going to do? He's going to hold like Rabbi Shimon, who says the chametz after Pesach is only midirabanan. So shelo b'zmano ben b'minan ben shelo b'minan mutarin ki Rabbi Shimon. Okay, Rabbi Shimon said chametz shavar lava Pesach isn't forbidden. The problem is, he said it's not forbidden by Torah law, it's forbidden by rabbinic law. Why isn't he strict there? We're going to have to talk about that. Okay, we'll get to that tomorrow. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, now he has a much more lenient opinion, and he would have made our lives much easier if we had held like him. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, chametz bismano, even on Pesach, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, asur b'noten tam. Only if it gives flavor, which basically means it should be batal b'shishim, right? 1 in 60, chametz should be nullified, which would have made all our lives much easier, right? We wouldn't have had to go crazy with all the pre-Pesach preparations. So why? Because he holds, again, so let's read. Okay, so first we'll read the second part. Shelo b'zmano after Pesach, bein b'minan, bein shelo b'minan mutal. It's going to be permitted entirely. Okay, by the way, permitted entirely means, okay, mutar means even if it gives flavor. That's a radical approach. It's saying once we already after Pesach, both Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan think, and Rashi says it, Ki Rabbi Shimon, if you look at the last Rashi on the page, and later the Gemara is going to question this. If it's Asher D'Rabbanan, how can we say it's entirely nullified? But basically they're going to say, since Chametz Shavar Lava Pesach isn't Asher according to Rabbi Shimon, therefore any sort of ta'arovet, it doesn't matter. Okay, in other words, it's permitted in any amount. Okay, I assume it would have to be rove, but it's hard to know exactly. So now, let's go through Rabbi. So again, chametz bismano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino b'noten tam, Rabbi Yochanan l'ta'ameh. So why does he hold that? To Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish ta'ameh travayu. They both say kol isurin shebatorah. They disagree with what Rav and Shmuel said. Bein b'minan, bein shelo b'minan b'noten tam. They don't hold this dam par dam seir that we learned from there. No, they say it's always canceled. All right, unless it gives flavor, we're going to assume it's nullified. Shelo b'zmano. What about shelo b'zmano? Bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino mutarin ki Rabbi Shimon. That matches exactly what Shmuel said, which is Rabbi Shimon, who holds there's no lo ta'aseh about chametz shavar lava Pesach, is going right. It's only a knas, and that's why the Gemara is going to say, well, if it's a knas that the rabbis instituted, still it should be forbidden and it shouldn't be just nullified. But right now we're going to assume it's nullified, and tomorrow we'll get to his question as to why is it nullified. Okay, so we'll finish here for today, and have a Shavua Tov, everybody.